Okay, Fred, we spent some time now talking about your career as a musician and the different bands you played with, but my understand is that your proper job, if you will, for the last 40 years has been as a recording engineer and a record producer. So why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, we talked, I think, a little bit prior to this about some of the work that I did at Sweet Bass Studios with Flipside and La Bamba and BB Jam and a lot of local groups. But after that, once Sweet Bay closed, I moved up the road, up Lake Bradford Road to Flamingo Studios, which was a 24-track, 2-inch Studer studio.
Were you on 2 inch before?
We were on 2-inch before, but it was 16-track,
Oh,
which
okay.
is actually probably the best analog format they had because the tracks were the widest because there were only 16 on 2 inches instead of 24.
Same overall
Right. It was
space, but
yeah,
different.
yeah, and that was an MCI tape machine, the 16 track, but the 24 track was a Studer. Anyway, I worked there. I don't know. I was probably head engineer there for maybe 6 years, something like that. So I did some albums for Eli. It was their studio actually. Charlie Roberts owned it, and so they rehearsed there and worked out of there and recorded there. So I did an album or two for them, and I also did an album for a group that Charlie was managing out of Atlanta called Baby Blue, and it was a big hair band days. So, but they were similar style-wise to Eli.
Okay,
But
when you say big hair days,
Right.
I'm visualizing it.
yeah, I think we might have a photo of it somewhere along the line here. So Charlie Roberts owned Flamingo Studios, and he also booked Eli and played keyboards in it from time to time. They were always a very popular band in the Southeast, and they had a really great show with awesome lights and sound and just very professional production. One day I was sitting there, and they came up and they said, "Oh, Foghat's coming to town, and they want to record." And I was like, "What?" And sure enough, they pulled their Cine Cruiser up outside the front door, and they came in, and I recorded with them for about a week. They almost wore me out because they were out in their bus doing all kind of stuff, and they were just like, tag teaming me from one guy to the next. And I think the longest session we did was about 23 hours straight without much of a break. Anyway, it was an interesting experience.
Yeah.
And about that time, I was splitting my work up between there and another studio that I worked at in town called ESP Studios, which was basically it was a 1-inch tape format, 24 track, also analog. And it was owned by Junior Sheffield. He was a square dance caller who traveled all over the world calling square dances on the weekends and made a bunch of money, doing it and had a great time. So I would do all of his square dance recordings. Bobby Kennedy and Southern Satisfaction were coming in and recording the tracks, and then he could do his square dance calls over the music. And he would do popular songs or old country songs or jazz numbers, or he just did a wide variety of tunes, but all formatted to that square dance format. So many beats a measure, so many measures, so many times through, so he could do his calls.
Right.
So I did most of the albums that these plaques on the wall here represent were done at that studio.
Oh, okay.
So I did all of his stuff, and then I did a whole bunch of other artists there. And so I was working at ESP Studios and at Flamingo during that time. That was the late 80s, early 90s. And then probably about 1990, I had the opportunity to work at this studio called Interlight International. It was a company that Jerry Lundquist, that owned Homes and Land at the time, sold Homes and Land. So he spent about $7 million building this company. They had a really nice recording studio in there, and then they had a production studio with a bunch of producers, and they had a graphic studio where they were doing digital animation. I really loved doing that job. It was like a post-production job on a movie or TV show or something like that. And
Well, you're traveling forward in time with the technology.
yes, that's where I first started learning digital technology.
Yeah.
We were doing children's Bible stories. That's what we were recording, and it was R&D for Sony and Philips company. they would send me on a little videotape. They'd send me a rough drawing of the different characters and what the scenes were happening and all that, and a script. And so then I had to audition talent to get the vocalists for the characters, because it was all going to ultimately end up as animation.
Right.
So
were you using local talent for that?
yes, it was all local talent. And let's see. I think the story that I ended up with was David and Goliath. I got Brian Cerny to come in. If you know him, he's a radio personality here. Moose Magnificant is his company, I think. He came in to be Goliath, and then so he read all. He has kind of a husky voice, and he read all the lines and everything. And then I pitch shifted his voice down a little bit to make him sound even
more like a James Earl Jones kind of thing.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I had kids come in and would sing the songs that were part of the disc. What it was CDI technology before CD-ROM came out.
Yeah,
and they had these players that sat like a VCR up on your entertainment center, and they had a remote control with a joystick on it, and you could navigate through that machine, which was hooked up to your TV, onto the different icons, and you click on it, and then it would go to that part of the story, to be the song section.
So it was
and
indexed.
Yes, it was. Wow. Absolutely.
Okay.
And so, and it was the whole story laid out there, and it had, I don't know, 4 or 5 different places the kids could go to. But it all ended up being totally digital animation of the characters. And then I basically did the recording of the character voices and the music that would fly in here and there. And I'd do sound effects, when it needed sound effects, I put those in. So it was really fun for me to do that because, I just like the challenge of all that, trying to create a 3-dimensional, sound and to go with the picture. We had 4 engineers, I believe. Bruce Hensel was in charge of the audio department, and then there was Dave Murphy and Holly Jameson and myself.
This is something that's always kind of amazed me, is when you've got an audio track and you've got a video track and syncing those up. What a challenge that's got to be. I don't know if you use some kind of digital cue or is this?
I haven't done a lot of that. Yeah, I haven't done a lot of that because, like I say, this was animated, so they weren't on screen. The voices were not on screen. But yeah, I mean, I could always, when you're multi-tracking, you can always do a second take or another take or whatever, and look at it. That's the advantage of digital.
Cue than you were using. Okay.
Yeah, it's digital is so much better to work with because you can actually see the sound in addition to hearing the sound.
Right.
So and you can manipulate it around in just a numerous amount of ways.
So this was far more challenging. You had to do a visual cue to line these things up.
Absolutely. And I got so inspired, they decided, we're going to let anybody on staff write a song that's going to be used in this, in the David and Goliath story. So I went home and I thought, oh wow, this is my chance.
Here's the songwriter in you.
Here you go. I wrote 5 songs in one night, and they were all great little kids songs, about the story, and one of them got picked, and so it got used on the disc. So I was kind of proud of that.
Very cool.
But it was really fun. They ended up with a contract with Samsung, and they brought all of these Korean guys over that they were going to translate all of these Bible stories that they did. They had about 5 of them, I think, at that point. They were going to translate all of them into Korean. And so I had to do a lot of recording of Korean dialogue. And then I had a guy that came and sat by me, and he would tell me, right in here. And then by phonetics, by listening, hearing the sound, I could actually edit. So
you had to, once again, sync up the video to the audio using visual cues to a different language.
Yes.
Just their lips move.
That's right. I had no idea what they were saying, but he guided me through that. That was his job, and he was their audio guy. His name was Kyung Yang, and he lives in Atlanta now, actually. And we're still very good friends. He comes over at least once a year to see an FSU football game, so we go together, and we're still good buddies. They sent over a couple of producers and a graphics guy and an audio guy, and they were the nicest people in the world. They were so great. That was a wonderful time. I was kind of sad to see that go, but after that, I continued to work at ESP Studios a bunch until he closed, and then I just went independent.
Mixing the sound engineering is a gift and a skill. I'll tell you right now. I can't tell you how many times I've recorded myself, and I don't know how to get that balance. That
You have a tendency all of a sudden to start making yourself the loudest thing in the mix.
Of course, right.
He's like,
Of course.
I don't think I can hear myself quite well enough there. And then you play it back and you go, oh my gosh, that's obnoxious. But yeah, it is. It's a challenge, but I love doing it, so that's why I still do it.
But you got that professional tool bag now where you're doing a lot of things around town. People need somebody to run sound, to engineer the sound.
Well, yeah, I used to do a lot of live mixing around here
Mm-hmm.
for different concerts and stuff. I've done a bunch in Ruby Diamond and out on the Union Green before they turned it into something else. But yeah, I've done some live recording, but mostly I do studio recording.
Mm-hmm.
And and I do stuff at my church also. I mix the sound there for our morning services and stream the service with 3 different remote control cameras. And so I learned how to do that, and it's a good experience. And
You would be the person somebody would call if they had a band and they were doing a live performance and they wanted to get a good quality recording of what was going on for marketing purpose or something. Would you be the guy they'd call?
well, I'd be one of them.
Well, experience counts for a lot.
I don't have a lot of remote gear for doing something like that live, but I know people and have friends that do, and a lot of times I work with them.
You could put it together.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's the ticket.
If you know who Marcus Roberts is, he's a fantastic world-class jazz musician, pianist. Came to Florida State. He grew up in Jacksonville, came over here from St. Augustine, Florida School for the Blind. I got to record demos when he was just a student at Florida State, playing, and they brought him in, and we would do recordings for their class project. And he was fantastic. I think he had like 10 albums on Sony Columbia Records, and until they finally let him go, and they didn't really know how to market him, but he was brilliant. And so he started doing his own. So in about 1995, Les Stevenson, who's one of the owners of Music Masters, teamed up with him and started doing his recordings. And so at that point, I was able to become the assistant engineer to Les. So from 1995 up until, I don't know, last year, I worked on every live concert he did and every recording that he did. Some of them were remote, like at Ruby Diamond. We set up for 2 or 3 days and did a lot of recording there before a concert that they were going to do.
Yeah.
And then we took it over to Jacksonville and set all the stuff up, gear there up, and did it again. And that was when Wynton Marsalis came to town. He was a good friend of his because Wynton's little brother plays drums for Marcus's trio. In fact, they just did a concert this past Thursday night at the Moon and videoed it, so I'm looking forward to seeing what that's going to be like, because that was probably one of the best concerts he's ever done. Also, back in about 2012, I think, we recorded an amazing album called Across the Imaginary Divide, which was the Marcus Roberts Trio and Bela Fleck, who was a very creative, inspirational jazz banjo player and ultimately a really nice guy out of Nashville. It was quite an amazing collaboration and still stands up strong today.
Well, this gets into the area of production. When you're talking about all this stuff, and like I said earlier, you're the guy that we contact. It sounds like you're pulling all this together for all these events, which is really what a producer does, isn't it?
It is, and I've produced a lot of stuff, really. Yeah. But mostly I know the talents around town that, it's their expertise to do this particular part of it or do that particular part of it.
Yeah.
And
It's almost like hiring a general contractor. He's not going to build your house, but
That's
he's
right.
going to bring all the specific talent to bear.
Right, and that's basically what a producer does. I mean, some of them are real hands-on, and they want to control every note that's played and all that stuff. And I'm not like that. I want people to do their thing, and if I can offer some input into that makes it better, and they like it, then fantastic.
Well, that's
I'm
just
all for it.
experience,
But,
isn't it? I mean, your experience coming to bear, that I know it's going to sound, if you just tweak that a little bit, you're going to be happy.
Because, people make the best music when they feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And I want them to feel like, they're sitting at home playing their music, that not a pressure thing at all,
Right.
at least as far as I'm concerned.